Vikes Now. I am Dustin Baker, and we are 3 days away from the preseason. Vikings Raiders, Twin Cities, US Bank Stadium. Vikings haven't won a preseason game in 5 years. They are 0-10 in their last 10 preseason games, and it's an indictment of Mike Zimmer and Kevin O'Connell. This isn't just a O'Connell or a Zimmer thing, so we got to get off the schneid. And to do that, to prepare us for that, because we have a depth chart, we have Josh Frey. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. Yeah, Vikings certainly know John Harbaugh when it comes to the preseason. That winning streak actually ended last year, didn't it?
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
it was mammoth win streak, but I think it came to an end. I want to say maybe right away. It felt like I'll have to look that one up. But yeah,
Okay.
it's polar opposites for both purple teams. I really don't care if the Vikings win or lose, but they should win one as to keep avoiding, like the White Soxization of the Vikings preseason. We got a depth chart yesterday, and so I want to talk at length with you about that. We want to talk about surprises from it. Because the depth chart is always so cool. It's the first thing in print of shit we've been thinking about for the last 4 months. So the disclaimer that I usually give, and you tell me if you disagree, is if your favorite player or your favorite rookie is buried, that is not an indictment. Jordan Addison was WR4 on the first depth chart last year. Ivan Pace was ILB5, and that all changed within a couple weeks. However, usually if some of the rookies or unsung guys have climbed, that is a good indicator of staying power. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, yeah, it's kind of like you just said. It's kind of if rookies are a little bit buried early on. First of all, this is an unofficial depth chart, so there's a lot that could change in the next few weeks with preseason rolling up and then practices with everything, the joint practices that are coming up. That's probably going to tell the team a little bit more than the actual preseason, just because they have the opportunity to go through situational things and get a little bit, I don't want to say more physical, but I mean, I think they're kind of more open to running a lot of their younger guys in those rather than the actual games nowadays. But yeah, if a rookie's a little bit buried on the depth chart right away, especially for this first unofficial one, I wouldn't say it's a huge deal. But if there are like UDFA guys that are surprisingly high, it probably means that they've been killing it in camp, and hopefully they're able to continue to do so. So yeah, I think you're spot on with it.
Okay. And we're going to jump into those. I also want to say, when you talked about the unofficial depth chart, it's always funny when the reporters ask O'Connell about depth chart, because you can tell it gets on his nerve. It's like
He
somebody
hates
asked
it.
him. Yeah, it's like somebody asked him about Trump, Biden, and Harris. Like he's like, oh yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
He always skates it. He's got a smile on his face. You could tell it gets on his nerves because I think in his mind, the depth chart is either fluid or like he knows, but he doesn't want to tell everybody as to dash hopes. But when reporters, because that's their job to ask about, he's like, yeah, you guys, I don't know.
And
Every time.
I think these preseason depth charts are kind of interesting because it might just be honestly releasing these depth charts just to see certain guys on the field at the same time and how they gel together.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't even necessarily know if it's exactly the order that he thinks that the team is in right now. It's just, hey, can we get these guys on the field at the same time and just see how they actually do out there? And then maybe we can find something that carries over to the regular season. I don't know. It's kind of interesting stuff.
Yeah, it certainly is. Let's jump into them. Let's go back and forth because I think our surprises differed a little bit, although they did overlap. So what's the first one you got that when you pulled it up, Vikings.com, you're like, oh, okay.
So the first one, I don't necessarily even know if it's a surprise at this point. I'm just kind of curious to see how this has changed over the past year. But I've got Blake Brandel as the left guard, the starting
Mm-hmm.
left guard right now, which it's obviously from what's been said and what's been reported over the past few months, it shouldn't necessarily be a surprise to a lot of folks that Brandel's got that starting job right now over guys like Dalton Reisner. But it's just interesting to think about the fact that the Vikings lost Ezra Cleveland to that foot injury last year. They felt like they didn't have a guy that could hold down that left guard spot. So they went out and got Dalton Reisner, and it was his job for the entire rest of the season. There was really no question about it. And now all of a sudden, not only is Brandel the starting left guard, Reiser's not even listed as a left guard on the depth chart. He's a right guard now, which is a position he's never played before. So I don't necessarily know if it's a surprise. It's just it's interesting. It's going to be interesting for me to find out, as reporters do more digging into some of these things, exactly how this process has changed from when Reiser initially joined the team to where he's at now.
Yeah, there's all kinds of oddities because Brandel started off as a tackle unceremoniously, was a guard, and then Reisner, it took forever for him to re-sign. Then he did, and he had his big Twitter moment, like, yeah, I'm back, baby. I think that's what he wanted. It was just to be celebrated as a free agent moment. But now he's demoted, and he's playing a position, like you said, that he hasn't played. I'm sure he'll be just fine. But the Brandel hype was real when Wes Phillips said it in May. He wasn't lying. And it's cool now that they actually have depth at offensive guard. And, if we would have had this show in 2019, we'd be praying for this.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, if something were to happen with Ed Ingram where he takes a step back, I think he did at least decently well last year. He at least wasn't stepping on Kirk Cousins' feet all the time last year. So I think if for whatever reason he takes a step back in year 3, or he suffers another injury like he missed a couple weeks last year, then you've got Dalton Reisner there. He's a veteran who started his entire NFL career. It's left guard to right guard, so it's a little bit of a transition, but it's still guard. It's still kind of the same sort of thing. You're just doing things in the opposite motion, sort of. But yeah, like you said, it's really cool that now, after years and years of us just be like, oh God, they got nobody that they could fill in that guard spot. They're going to have to just go find some schmuck and throw them out there if somebody gets hurt. But now they've actually got legitimate options. And even rookie Michael Juergens, I think if something were to happen and he were able to get an opportunity, I think I thought he was really cool coming out of college. And I think he's got an opportunity to showcase what he can do at the NFL level. So that's one of the guys I'm excited to see this weekend, actually, just see him get out on the field and see what he can do.
Yeah, I think a lot of us had him penciled in as a center, but then they have him at guard. I've kind of thought that if Bradbury remains Bradbury, which is just mid or sometimes good, that they would pivot to Juergens if he had a successful offseason. But we shall see. The first thing I had that differs from your list, and this is broad bird's eye view, because if you've watched Vikings dealings this summer, nobody's surprised by it. But on the whole, Andrew Booth and Lewis Cine buried once again on a depth chart is big news for the grand scope of Vikings football. If we would have started to hash this thing out in February, we'd probably say, my God, Booth and Cine have to do something this year or this summer, and they haven't. Cine's been hobbled by some damn injury, and then Booth has already been lapped on the depth chart by guys that shouldn't be lapping him. So I wanted to point that one out briefly, is unless something really changes, I think Lewis Cine is for sure a goner, because I don't think they can keep 6 safeties. Bobby McCain plays there at that spot now. And then Andrew Booth, they have him situated right on the roster bubble at CB5. So that's my first surprise. What's your next one?
I'm going to stick with the cornerback spot and go to Fabian Moreau. This is a guy that was just brought in a couple weeks ago. Kind of seemed like, we're out of options here. Who's some guy that we can find and throw into the depth chart? Oh, Fabian Moreau is available. We'll go get him. And now he's CB4 on the depth chart, and it's really cool to see. And obviously, like, this isn't just some random dude that they found on the street or anything. This dude started 38 games over the past 3 seasons at the NFL level. So he definitely knows what he's doing at the cornerback spot. It's interesting that I'm curious to see if it's a matter of he's actually like balling out at camp, or if it's just a situation where, oh crap, the Vikings we just don't have anybody else that we can have fill in the spot. So Fabian Moreau is taking it over. So that's kind of another thing I'm going to be keeping an eye out on preseason as well.
And he was the guy I was referring to that has apparently already passed Booth on the depth chart, so not a good omen for Booth, whose job security I thought got weirdly safe after Kyrie Jackson's death and then Mekhi Blackman's season-ending injury. But nope, it seems like Booth is right there, kind of a quintessential roster bubble guy. On cornerbacks, my next surprise is that Duke Shelley is listed down there at CB7, CB8. And they should know all about him. The Vikings should, because he played there wonderfully in 2022. So for a team whose most concerning aspect of the depth chart because of tragedy and injury is cornerback, Duke Shelley is not even really in the mix, unless this is one of those things where it was an oversight, or we get to August 27th and Shelley makes the team, great. But right now, if you believe in the efficacy of the initial depth chart, he's rather buried, isn't he?
I would say so. And it might honestly be like between Ed Donatel and Brian Flores being completely different defensive coordinators. Like he had great success with Ed Donatel, but that was largely just playing backup prevent defense where he didn't necessarily have to get up on his guy at the line of scrimmage or anything. Whereas with Brian Flores, he's probably going to be asked to get up and play some more man press coverage on against some of these wide receivers and be a sub 6 foot under 200 pounds. He's that's definitely not necessarily his greatest skill set in the world. So I can't say I'm necessarily surprised by it, but it definitely is notable to see him buried as much as he is on the depth chart, even behind guys like you mentioned, Andrew Booth, where doesn't seem like Booth can even get on the field at this point, and he's listed above Duke Shelley. I don't know if Duke Shelley's going to actually make this roster anymore. Like we talked about last week, where kind of I wasn't necessarily convinced that he'd be the 2022 version of Duke Shelley, but I thought, hey, maybe this guy can at least be a depth piece on the roster, and now it just doesn't even seem like he's going to be that at this point.
Yeah, that's the odd part is they already know his story, and loud and clear, one of the best CBs in football per PFF in 2022, and then now a team that really needs somebody at cornerback because of all the shit that's happened. It's like, well, no, he's probably not going to make the team. All right, so I think we got cornerbacks covered. What's your next surprise that came out of the initial unofficial depth chart?
Yeah, let's talk about some of the undrafted free agents here. Gabriel Murphy and his rise up the depth chart at the outside linebacker spot. I think this was a dude that I thought would be like a 5th round pick maybe in the draft because his year at UCLA alongside, I'm blanking on his name now, Liatu Latu, that first rounder that went to the Colts. I think he had a great year and was kind of overshadowed by Latu a little bit. But at the end of the day, you look at all of his advanced metrics between pressures and just generating sacks and consistently getting after opposing quarterbacks. This dude can definitely rush the passer, and that's kind of something that the Vikings need at this point, especially from some of their younger guys to step up. And with some of the injury concerns with Andrew Van Ginkel at the top of the depth chart and Jonathan Grenard not necessarily having the most steady production throughout his NFL career at this point. So having a guy like Gabriel Murphy who can potentially fill in if needed and rise up the depth chart and contribute to this team, I think is really cool to see. And he's definitely made his statement so far.
And he appears to be listed at OLB 5,
yeah,
which would probably get him over the bubble and onto the team. I mean, at the very least, or very worst, he'd be on the practice squad. And is it accurate that the one knock on him really was his arms are too short? Or is there more to it?
Kind of the sense that I got is just he doesn't have the longest arms in the world, but he's so athletic and so powerful that I don't necessarily even see that as a huge issue for him, where he can get around having some of the shorter arms on the team. So yeah, I think that would be the one knock, but I'm not super concerned about it.
It's always so weird with draft items. Excuse me, my eye's giving me a problem. It's always so weird, like when you would look at that on a scouting report. I know draft scouts are good at their job, but I would see that and think, who cares? Almost like Ivan Pace last year, 1.5 inches too short to be any good. I would think, who cares? Or like on the other hand, was it last year during the draft lead up, the cornerback that went to the Commanders, was it Emmanuel Forbes?
Yep.
When he's like 160 pounds, it's like, why don't they care about that? And then, he shows up the NFL and he actually is really tiny. And I don't know if he was gangbusters last year, but it's so weird how there's like rules. And sometimes they abide by them and sometimes they don't. Speaking of climbers from the UDFA ranks, there's been a lot of smoke about Deshaun Jones, mainly because the team didn't have, until training camp started, a WR3 that we were really confident about. Now, Jalen Naylor has mostly licked those concerns. But there was speculation that, hey, watch for Deshaun Jones. He looks like he's kind of game ready. And those theorists, I believe, were correct, at least per vindication of this depth chart. He's listed around WR6, which is kind of Tristan Jackson territory from Vikings teams past. So at the very least, it seems Deshaun Jones will probably live on the practice squad. And if he should be right down there, based on his draft stock at WR11, like with Thayer and Malik Knowles and those guys. But he's notably climbed. So in addition to Murphy, who has climbed, Deshaun Jones as well. Did you know about him, Deshaun Jones, before he became a Viking?
I knew a little bit about him just because he's a Big Ten guy at Maryland.
Yeah.
And I think he definitely stands out because he's a solid route runner, and he can create space in the middle of the field and get open. So I think that's kind of probably what the Vikings have seen out of him throughout training camp, and hopefully that's what they've seen anyway throughout training camp, is his ability to just create space with his route running. But yeah, it's really cool to see him rising up the depth chart too, and heck, we'll probably see him in action on Saturday. So it'll be cool to see him against NFL talent.
When I first saw that steam about Deshaun in probably May and then into June, I first thought was, it's because he went to Maryland. People think he's automatically Diggs. That was just my first thought. But when you dig into it, the skill set that he has with the route running you mentioned, and then now the evident roster climb, it'll be cool to monitor him. And Vikings fans will love to have to watch wide receivers. They always circle one, and they hope that he busts out for this preseason, because he should get notable time. My other surprise, before we get into your last one or two, and we'll preview some of the preseason stuff, is Robert Tonyan, the most experienced pass-catching tight end. If you assume TJ Hawkinson starts the season on the PUP list, he's listed around TE5. And we were told in June that, man, this guy really looks the part. He's going to be a red zone threat. And they can't keep 5 tight ends. So to me, it was rather weird that for a team that probably needs a pass-catching tight end, that Johnny Munt would be ahead of Tonyan. Did that surprise you at all?
I wouldn't necessarily say it surprises me, just because, I don't know, Tanyan's last couple of years haven't really done a ton for me, other than it was his 2020 season with the Packers, where Aaron Rodgers was balling out and getting him the ball every time they went down into the red zone. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think Johnny Munn and even Josh Oliver, I think they've proven enough over the past year or two with the Vikings that they're capable of catching passes when TJ Hawkinson isn't on the field and they need somebody to just run around in the middle of the field and be a safety net for their quarterback. So I'm not necessarily surprised by it or concerned by it by any means, because I think Munt and Oliver are definitely capable of holding down that role, and I think they've proven that they deserve that opportunity at this point.
So I think that the masses, myself included, might have been hoodwinked by the name recognition of Tonyan. Because if we're paranoid that Hawkinson won't be ready, well, we at least need somebody. And Aaron Rodgers made this guy good, damn it. That may have been what happened in retrospect. All right, you got a final surprise or two before we look at some of this preseason stuff?
Yeah, kind of just going to the defensive line again. Jerry Tillery being listed as a starter there. I don't necessarily know if it should be surprising, but it kind of was, just because he's former first-round pick, obviously, and he had all that hype coming into the NFL. But over the past few years, he's just kind of been mostly a reserve guy who rotates into the defense. But the fact that he's holding down that starting job over guys like James Lynch, Jaquelin Roy, who I really like coming out of that 2022 draft or 2023 draft class for the Vikings, and the fact that Tillery's come in and seems to be holding down that starting job, it had me raising an eyebrow a little bit and just being like, I wonder what this guy's proven in camp so far. So I'm curious to see what happens when he gets onto the field.
Yeah, he got cleated on Saturday. I don't know if you saw that. So he should be back. It sounds like it's a nasty thing, but it's not overly detrimental to football. Kevin O'Connell talked about that yesterday. And the thing that was odd about him, I think, kind of like we talked about getting hoodwinked by the name recognition of Tonyan, I think we were disappointed when Tillery was the keynote defensive tackle signing, because there were so many other guys they could have got. So when they got some first round bust that's, a cast off, it's like, really, that's the guy we get? He played about 500 snaps last year. It's about half the time. And his PFF grade was 67.7. So by Viking standards, that's certainly an improvement. Yeah, over Dean Lowry and the gang. It's just that he has to kind of have a rebirth or reclamation with Brian Flores. And if he's at the top of the depth chart, so be it. All right, let's get into some preseason items. I think you have to come up with these on the fly. So Saturday, the Vikings take on the Raiders. Somehow they're underdogs by 3.5 points, probably because of that damn losing streak. I've got a little list of things we can go back and forth. At the bottom of the list, but still important, I want to see how Will Reichard looks, because it's been so damn long since the Vikings had a kicker that they drafted or found, and the guy was good. It was the good days of Blair Walsh. And before that, at least in recent memory, Ryan Longwell was very good, but he came from the Packers. So Will Reichard's consistency, I mean, if he misses a kick, that's not the end of the world. But I really want to see if they're going to be able to showcase his leg a little bit. So the kicker position, because it's so snake bitten for this franchise, I will watch. What's one you have on your mind?
Well, you stole the Riker one from me, but
Oh,
I'll
really?
stick with the special teams here, and I'll go with the new kick return rule. I'm curious to see how Canadian Nwangwu or whoever's out there on the field on Saturday. I don't know if it'll be Nwangwu or Chandler. However, Kevin O'Connell decides he wants to, and Matt Daniels decide that they want to run this thing. But with the new kick return rule, it's kind of more like a play from scrimmage rather than the kick returns that we're typically used to. And Nwangwu thrived in that old kick return role with the Vikings over the past 3 years. But now with it being more of a play from scrimmage type of lineup and everything, that dude hasn't really seen much opportunities as a running back with the Vikings offense. So I'm curious to see if he can continue the same sort of production in that special teams kick return role that he has over the past few years.
Yeah, and then the return rule change in general for those who didn't watch the Hall of Fame game, it'll be the first taste for most of Vikings fans to figure out. They're going to be
weird.
they're going to be like, oh yeah, I forgot about this, or I flat out didn't know about it. They'll say, what the hell is this? So I have Seen and Booth on my list. I'm not going to get in my speech about them again, but this is to me their last best chance, these preseason games, to show like, hey, we have that dog in us. Remains to be seen if that'll happen. And then we just talked about the defensive tackles. But I want to ask you if we think Tillery will probably start next to Harrison Phillips on certain downs, and then they love Jonathan Bullard. I'm sure he finds a way to stay on the roster. What about like the underdogs like Levi Drake Rodriguez or Jaquelin Roy? Do you expect both those guys to make the team or get substantial playing time this season?
I think it's probably going to be one or the other at this point, unfortunately. And I honestly, I think Levi Drake Rodriguez has shown just about everything that he possibly could as a seventh round pick so far in training camp, just staying out on the field late. He's bringing all the energy to the field, press conferences, whatever interviews he's doing. So I'm really excited to see him take the field on Saturday. But yeah, at the end of the day, it might be a battle between Roy and Rodriguez for that last roster spot at the defensive tackle position.
Yeah, there's others there too, like Jonah Williams, who looked
Jonah
pretty good at
Williams, yeah.
times. James Lynch, who always looked good but was never healthy
Yeah.
for the Vikings. So it's a crowded spot. It's one of those ones where they got a lot of bodies, but no absolute standouts or Pro Bowlers. Do you have a couple other? We'll get to the quarterback here and to close out the show. Do you have any other storylines that you're watching?
Honestly, I might just throw Jalen Naylor's name out there again, just because we haven't talked about him yet today. And I love me some Jalen Naylor. And so far at camp seems like he's doing everything that he can to prove himself as a wide receiver 3, listed as wide receiver 3 on this initial depth chart. So once he gets down on the field against actual competition, against a different team, a different defensive look, how does he perform? Does he continue to progress in the way that the Vikings have seen him progress throughout training camp, or does he take a step back and go back to being kind of that more wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6 guy that we've kind of been used to over the past couple of years?
They can't afford to let that happen
Right.
because then what? Then you actually do have to go do the Hunter Renfrow thing that we've talked about since mid-May. But Naylor for sure, because nobody's ever had any beef with his talent. It's whether or not he actually plays. A couple other ones to monitor are the cornerbacks, although we talked about them in the first segment. Somebody, if we consider presumptive starters Byron Murphy and Shaq Griffin, I think we've talked ourselves into being, hey, they're veterans, they're good, but that isn't really good. I mean, it's decent guys, and then what? And you have to hope that Andrew Booth is ready or Caleb Evans is coached up to the utmost. So cornerbacks, to see what their plan is in the preseason game. And my other favorite one that I always seem to forget until the few days before preseason is because Kevin O'Connell never plays starters, you have a built-in hack to figure out who's going to make the team. So I invite fans, whether you're there in attendance or at home watching it on NFL Network, just figure out who's not playing. And then those guys should be safe from the roster bubble. All right, let's get into the quarterback stuff because that really is the attraction for the preseason game. I don't care what anybody else says, assuming that J.J. McCarthy and Sam Darnold play, and I think the other two will. Tell me, what is your Is it just seeing McCarthy in an organized setting? I think that's it for me, to see if this training camp like majesty can translate, or are you just as interested to see Darnold?
I'm honestly equally curious to see both of them because Kevin O'Connell has given such high praise for both guys throughout training camp, and obviously that's kind of his job at this point, is to just hype his guys up as much as he possibly can at this point in the summer. But yeah, I'm kind of curious to see how both perform, and I'm curious to see how they compare against the Raiders defense this weekend. Obviously, they'll probably be going against lot of different personnel in terms of just substitutions and getting guys. It's preseason, so they're not going to keep the same guys out on the field for too long. But yeah, I'm kind of curious to see how both perform this week. And honestly, even assuming Jared Hall gets onto the field at some point, I'm curious to see how his development is going as well, because this dude he had a raw deal in his rookie season, and he got a lot of flack for it. But I'm curious to see how he kind of has bounced back from the 2023 campaign.
Yeah, in an extreme alternate universe, the Vikings could have re-signed Cousins, and then Hall could have remained like the young guy we had that we were grooming, even though he's pretty old for that task. The kind of the Kellen Mond feeling that we had in 2021. So because we haven't talked to you at length since May or so, I want to get to close out the show from you. I want to know what you would do week 1 at quarterback, and then secondarily, what is your prediction now that we have about 2.5 weeks of McCarthy tape that looks pretty damn spicy in a good way? What would you do week 1, and what do you think will happen at QB1?
I think for both answers, I'm going Sam Darnold
Okay.
starting at QB1. Just because I think at this point, the Vikings, they should probably realize, maybe they don't, but they're obviously going into every week trying to win the game. But I think at this point, the Vikings' goal in 2024 is not to win a Super Bowl. I've said that pretty much all spring, been pretty consistent about that. It's mainly just developing the super young roster and seeing if they can use their salary cap space next spring to go all in on 2025. And I think rushing JJ McCarthy onto the field at this point would be a little bit foolish, given the fact that you've got Sam Darnold there. You've got Nick Mullins there as well. Both guys who have started consistently at points throughout their NFL careers. So making sure that JJ McCarthy is absolutely ready for when he takes his first snaps. And maybe that is week 1, but I kind of have a feeling with how a lot of rookie QB situations go, that probably isn't going to necessarily be the case. He could probably be about 80%, but I want him to be absolutely 100% ready when he takes his first NFL regular season snaps. So that's why I kind of think that they'll stick with Darnold, and I want him to stick with Darnold at this point.
Is there anything McCarthy could do the rest of this month for you to say, "Oh shit, let's go ahead and do this"?
Yeah, I mean, if he goes like 10 for 12 with 2 touchdowns and over this weekend and into the rest of the preseason games, then I'd probably be at that point like, okay, yeah, this dude's ready. Just get him on the field whenever you want. But honestly, it would take a lot like that for me to kind of sway from that opinion. I'm excited to see McCarthy on the field at some point, but like I said, I just want him to be absolutely ready for his first NFL snaps.
If we get to the 1st of September and there's a press conference where Kevin O'Connell says this guy has won the job, he's starting week 1, will you be mad or anxious?
Absolutely not.
No?
I
Okay.
trust Kevin O'Connell, and if he thinks that JJ McCarthy's ready, he's spent a lot more time than him with him than I have. So I'm gonna trust Kevin O'Connell's judgment, being a former quarterback, being a guy that was brought in to develop a young quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings and their future. If he says we're ready to go, I'm gonna trust that they're ready to go and be excited to see what happens in week 1.
And because you're such a draft head, is there anything that has happened in the NFL in the last 3.5 months, whether it's a player in a bad team, whether it's a guy who's starting to show up at training camp? Is there any rookies that you've been like, I knew it, or, oh my God, what are they doing?
I'll be honest with you, over the past few weeks with everything that I've been just going through in personal life, I haven't gotten a chance to do much outside of the Vikings at this point. So I'm gonna have to get back to you on that one and hopefully have an answer for you at some point in the next few weeks as I settle in and get back into this thing we call NFL.
Yeah, it's perfect timing for it because the preseason completely takes off this weekend. All right, sir. I will be in Hawaii for the next several days, but I think you and I can probably record next Thursday or Friday, so we're about eight days from now. So yeah, preseason game for the folks to watch. Somehow the Vikings are underdogs. They haven't won one of these since 2019. Any closing thoughts?
No, I'm just excited for Saturday. See what this team can do, and maybe we'll snap this losing streak finally.
Yep, and then we have no more Sean Mannion for good.
Yeah.
He's now a Packers coach, if you can believe that. So the preseason enters a new era. What a sweet way to do it with a 21-year-old quarterback. All right, man. We'll talk to you in a little over a week, okay?
Sounds good. See you then.
Yep, take care.